Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox, and a man who works long hours can hide anything.
Hi, I'm Daniel Dresner. And what if it is always the end of the world?
Welcome to Space the Nation, where we look at science fiction through the lens of
Neo-Malthusianism
and social learning theory. Today, we are inaugurating our
Obama or Obummer
series by talking about Emily St. John Mandel's Sea of Tranquility, which was on Obama's, I think it was like his summer reading list.
Summer of 2022.
2022.
Yeah, the book came out in the spring of 2022, I believe. Yes.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
And it is available, where you get books. And we're going to be talking about movies next. A couple of movies I'm excited to see. Sorry to Bother You and Poor Things. And then after that, we're approaching our 5th anniversary.
It is the
5th year, 4th anniversary.
It's complicated.
How does that work?
Time is complicated, Anna. And so in this particular case, I believe it is the start of the 4th year of Space the Nation. However,
yes,
you can argue we did the churn for sci-fi for 2 years. So really it is also our 5th anniversary of doing a podcast together, which we are going to celebrate by doing a podcast episode of Not Science Fiction. We
Now that you said it out loud, I'm like, well, that's weird.
It's a little weird. But I think the way to think about this is that we are celebrating our...
When we talked about it, it sounded like a really cool idea. But now I'm like, wait,
No.
Odd.
I think this is a good idea. I think it's what we need is a slight mental break. And so we're going to do something that is not science fiction, but I suspect is something that many of our listeners will enjoy. We'll find out when we get to it. There is another opportunity, by the way, for us to do something not related to science fiction. And that is if we get up to 250 patrons. We are now, I believe, at like less than 20 away from 250 patrons. Mm-hmm. So, all we need is to get to 250, and then we will do a topic that is a patron-only episode on a topic chosen by the patrons. It can be anything except a video game or a television series or a 9-hour movie about the Holocaust.
Or a 9-hour video game about the Holocaust.
Yeah, God. Anyway, but for all this to happen...
Oh, God. Someone's made that video game.
Actually,
No,
believe it or not, we talked about this for Space Giving for tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. There's actually a really clever little video game that they talk about in there that is not the Holocaust, but
I was like, oh, God.
I'm not kidding. This actually, it's in the novel, and those of you who have read it know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So, but it's really interesting.
We were talking about patrons.
Yeah.
Did you want to finish the thought there, Dan?
Yeah, we need, just fewer than 20 patrons to get to the 250 level. And to become a patron, just go to, our Patreon page at patreon.com/spacethenation. You not only get to choose potentially an episode for us, but you also get, early access to podcasts. You get ad-free access to podcasts. You get access to our monthly AUAs and also access to our awesome Discord channel.
That's right, which is where you can make suggestions that maybe are science fiction. And we tend to take quite a few suggestions from the crowd. And I also should mention the crowd itself is the main reason to be there. We have a wonderful Discord community, really cool, supportive, lots of different kinds of people.
Yep, from all kinds of backgrounds.
I'm on there a fair amount. Dan, he makes an appearance, like a court-ordered, pretty much, appearance. But he's our distant divorced dad. But
I am not a distant divorced dad. But you know what? You're making me feel like I want to be a distant divorced dad now. Maybe I don't want to go on all that much.
But if we had like a perfect communities, chosen family, then we wouldn't have cool creative reasons to exist, to produce cool art. That's what I meant to say. We have reasons to exist, but not a creative output that would ask important questions about the world.
Speaking of reasons to exist, Anna.
Yeah. I don't know where you're going with that at all. Oh, the book.
Yes. Yes, Anna. We're here to talk about a book.
Oh, I thought you were talking about my reasons to exist.
No,
It's a little personal.
no.
Yeah, the book. Okay, Sea of Tranquility. We have done a few Obama books.
Yes.
For the podcast.
And let's just say that I think it would be safe to say that both you and I admire Barack Obama as a politician, as an orator, a statesman, whatever you want to say. But I think it would be safe to say our qualms with Obama's science fiction choices started with the three-body problem and then metastasized badly with the Ministry for the Future.
Yeah, and I recommend both of those episodes for people to listen to.
Right.
I think they're pretty funny. What they are not are appreciations of those books. Although you kind of liked Three Body Problem, whereas I was just kind of bored and frustrated by it.
The one thing I will say is
Ministry for the Future was interesting because we both hated it so much. It was actually kind of enjoyable to read on one level, except for the chapter that's just lists of countries.
Yep.
That it makes me laugh. Like, it's committing to the bit, which you gotta respect.
The one thing I will say is, I don't know if one thing I found out reading the McKay Coppins Romney book is that Romney also liked the three-body problem, which I do find kind of weird. The point is,
it's completely in character for me.
The point is, we began to notice a problem. Now, to be fair, Obama also recommended Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11, which we both liked. So, we're kind of thinking, what's going on here? Why is it that, Obama only bats, 1 out of 3 at best in terms of his science fiction choices? So we decided...
for what we've seen.
From what we've seen. Yes, exactly. So we decided we want to create this category, occasionally dipping into some of Obama's, other science fiction choices to see whether or not there is any pattern. Why is it? Because I think this is something we're just trying to work out. It's not that we're,
I have a suspicion. For me, this is testing an hypothesis.
Yes. Oh, good. That's a good scientific thing. Your hypothesis being?
Which is, I don't think he really likes science fiction. Like, I think he likes science fiction that, like, people who don't like science fiction like, which tends to be, to me, kind of generally not very good science fiction. Like literary science fiction.
So you mean science fiction with pretensions to art, as it were?
Yeah, in the 3 books that we've talked about are interesting examples because the Three Body Problem and Ministry of the Future, I think, were both written by authors with serious science fiction cred.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So it's kind of hard to call them not science fiction.
No, they're definitely science fiction. I mean, you can talk about good and bad, but
it's literary. It's like it's literary science fiction, and also, well, with Ministry for the Future, especially, like, it has a fucking agenda, man.
Yes.
Like, it doesn't want to be science fiction; it wants to be a white paper.
Yes.
And
as I said at the time, I remember this. Yes, that is an insult to white papers. That's all. Yes.
Yes. And it does seem to me, I think it kind of gets to what people. It's a Rorschach test for Obama, because do you believe he's a genuine person? Like, do you believe that he puts to the world like who he genuinely is?
In other words, the question with his sci-fi choices is, are these books he actually legitimately liked, or is he curating, an image that he is trying to maintain? And he's a politician. All politicians are trying to curate an image. So, hardly unique to Obama. But
one thing I'll say about Mitt Romney is I don't think Mitt Romney's like trying to curate an image. I think he's a weirdo. Like, I think
you know what? The way I would put it is, I think he was trying to curate an image when he was actually running for office. Now he's not. And he also and he was not good at curating an image, which is part of the problem.
Yes.
So, part of it is a good politician is good at curating images. But we just want to check and see whether this image, is actually
But it's sort of like, Obama, the way that he dresses now is like super cool. Like he's one of those people that's kind of frustrating because he seems to carry off both trying and not trying at the same time. Like a lot of you and I think, well, okay, I won't speak for you. I wasn't cool in high school. Right? Like I wasn't.
Anna, what? Actually, I am legitimately shocked by this, but yes, no, I was not cool in the slightest. Yeah.
But one of the things was I never understood the popular kids always were able to carry that off of like trying just hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like
or trying
putting
but not
just enough effort into your look or to who you were that like you could tell it was like I know that I've made these choices.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't completely like a random thing that they were the way that they were, but they weren't trying so hard, unlike me. just scrambling. Like how do you do this?
No, you can
how
say a
do
lot
you
of
be a teen in the world?
You can say a lot of things about Obama. You can't call him a try-hard. That doesn't fit.
That's right.
Yeah.
But so where do these books fit in? That's the question.
Okay.
And we have some commentary, further along those lines as we talk about the actual book. We'll just ponder,
which we should
figure that out.
Get to.
Okay, we're getting to it. The podcast, whether or not the podcast will ruin the book for you. And Dan?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that, first of all, this is not a long book. It doesn't take that long to read. There are we're going to discuss plot spoilers. It's kind of
there's
impossible.
A huge twist.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's impossible to talk about this book without talking about plot spoilers. And I'm a fan of the Mandelverse, so, I would recommend reading this before listening. If you have no interest whatsoever in any of Emily St. John Mandel's books, then sure, just listen away right now.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. Like, I think if you know anything about it, you can probably judge like whether or not you'd be into it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the Mandelverse is like one of those things where people think what they know what it is and they walk in that completely blows their mind.
Yeah.
It's like, it's kind of what you think it is. Like if you have any exposure to it, Speaking of previous exposure, Dan.
I did read this when it came out. And in fact, when we had our Spacemas episode from last year, this was on my list. So full disclosure, I'm a fan of the book. And I think it held up on the second reading for me. So I think I liked it better than you did. And we will talk about that as we go on.
Yeah, I really loved Station 11 more than I thought I would. That is actually what I'll say about the Mandelverse. I had an idea about what it was going in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think, did I watch the TV show before?
Yes, you did.
Not?
I'm pretty sure you did.
I did, and I really loved the TV show.
Yeah, the television show is extremely good, and it's different from the book, by the way. And I remember we were talking about the TV show, and then we decided to do the book.
I would say that I liked the TV show a little bit better than the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's gorgeous. I mean,
yeah.
No matter what you think, I mean, the performances are amazing, and it does solve some of the less strong parts of the book, including the one that she takes up herself.
Mm-hmm. In this book. This book gets a little meta, so yeah, we will address that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I did enjoy the book, and I was not prepared for how little I felt about this one.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, Dan, let's talk about the story behind the story.
Yeah, so we're flipping things up a little bit. I'll be doing the story behind the story. So this is Emily St. John Mandel.
Since you're the fan of the Mandelverse.
It's true.
I mean, I think it makes sense.
This is her 6th book. The germ of the idea for Sea of Tranquility came when she was promoting her 5th book, The Glass Hotel, which came out in March of 2020, which you may or may not be aware, there was a pandemic that started, right around then, which evoked her best-selling blockbuster, Station 11. Mandel was apparently toying with the idea of autofiction and wanted to capture the feeling of being on a book tour. While she recognizes the enormous good fortune of being a best-selling novelist, there are certainly downsides. She said in one interview, quote, "People say the most extraordinary things to me on the road, and I guess by extraordinary, I mostly mean sexist. Every interaction is autobiographical in the book. All these things people say to Olive, they say to me." You're not going to believe it, Anna, but Olive is Emily in this book. I did want to ask you whether, the sexist part, I mean, you had to promote a novel at one point. Did you?
Yeah, I've just been a woman in the world.
Yeah.
A woman who is a public person in the world who gets asked things by who people feel a certain amount of possession over, which is, I think, something that comes across in this, and what any woman who's had any bit of fame also deals with, is that people feel they have the right to ask you whatever,
anything and everything.
Yeah. So the one that I do remember that I wish I realized pretty quick that Olive and Emily were the same person, Dan. Believe it or not, I went to graduate school.
You are a sharp analyst on it. Yeah.
I went to University of Chicago. I get stuff like that.
Okay.
when someone says your husband must really love your child, like to
Right.
care for her while you're away.
Yeah.
And then she says there must be something wrong with my translator. I thought you said it must be very notable that my husband loves our child.
Yes.
And part of me was like, I hope that there was some version of that was real, like that she was because that's such a great,
It's a good
put
response.
down.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe she was able to say that like her human, because in the book it's a text to speech or whatever.
Right.
It's like a computer thing.
Yeah.
Because it's in the year 2020.
2203, I think, or 2204.
Yeah.
Yeah.
However you say that, we'll figure that out later. 2203. We'll figure that out in 21, probably 03. Part of me was like, I hope that she said something like that in the moment. Like she blamed her human translator, although that would be mean. But anyway, it was a good retort.
Yes. Anyway, Mandel started writing in the first few months of the pandemic, thinking of it as her way to stay sane. She based the character of Edwin on her great-grandfather, Neville St. Andrew St. John. And the pandemic, basically encouraged her to experiment, weaving the autofiction into a pandemic storyline. She structured Sea of Tranquility like David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas, which is one of her favorite novels. She had wanted to write a time travel story, but to overcome the structural challenges of the time travel story, as she notes, time travel creates an infinite loop, removing both cause and effect and free will from the equation, which is disastrous for fiction. For the actual writing of the novel, Mandel woke up at 4 a.m. to write for the 2 hours before her daughter woke up. The schedule that is described in the novel for Olive and her family's quarantine matched Mandel's actual schedule while writing the novel. She's very interested in the idea of simulation in novels and cities and the narratives that permit the idea of colonialism. Mandel also...
What does that mean, Dan?
In the sense that I think the narrative of Canada, for example, being an empty place that can be then filled with good Englishmen, which is, of course, not a accurate narrative of what Canada was.
So the idea of a simulation allowing for colonialism.
Right. If you think of simulation as a constructive narrative, then yes, that works.
Because colonialism obviously happens outside of a simulation, and simulations don't have to have colonialism.
Sure, but colonialism
is the constructed world.
Right. Or also colonialism is easier if you're telling yourself that you are populating an unpopulated land. Colonialism can obviously happen if you also slaughter people, but even the harshest of colonials finds that harder.
We'll talk about this again when he comes up later, because I'm curious what you think of the relationship she did with that relationship.
Yeah.
Because also she does have colonies on the moon, where, as far as we know,
which is unpopulated, yes.
Yeah.
Which is legitimately, I guess you could say it's an act of colonialism, but it's not. It's one in which there is no.
As far as we know, that would be.
Anyway, Mandel also used the characters of Paul and Morella from The Glass Hotel, her previous novel, in this book, and she's acknowledged in interviews that she likes the idea of a Mandelverse. In April of 2022, it was announced that Mandel would be working with Patrick Somerville, the person who adapted Station 11 for HBO Max, on Max adaptations of both Sea of Tranquility and The Glass Hotel.
Well, I'm optimistic. You know what? Well, let's talk about my problems with the novel. And I'm not even sure this is one that it has the kinds of problems that a television or movie adaptation can fix. But we'll see. Chekhov's What's It, Dan? This is a thing in the first act that comes back to be important in the third act. And I know from the script what yours is.
It's Chekhov's,
so go.
Chekhov's violinist. Sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hard not to pick that one.
That was an obvious. It was a gimme. I grant you that. Yes. Yes. It was a gimme, but
I guess Chekhov's glitch is the same thing in a way, right? And we will discover in the next few minutes exactly why Dan and I are kind of like, guess you got to choose that one because you're on top of the plot.
Okay, here we go. This is our jacket blurb, which we do for books. And to be blunt, like The Gone World, I am glad I don't need to recap this one precisely because that would drive me insane. So this novel takes place in 4 separate time periods. The earliest begins in 1912 when Edwin St. John St. Andrew, the youngest grandson of an English earl, scandalizes a dinner party by criticizing the British Raj and is exiled to Canada. He makes his way across the continent to Cayette.
To be clear, he's exiled by his family.
Yes.
I do like the idea of just the British royal family being like, we heard you said a bad thing.
Well, to be fair, It's the British royals who, like they're the landed gentry or something. Yes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Anyway, he makes his way across the continent to Cayette on Vancouver Island, where he has a remarkable and disorienting experience involving an odd priest named Gaspery Roberts. And just to be clear, the remarkable and disorienting experience is not involving an odd priest is not what you think it is, just to be very clear.
Oh, Dan.
Sorry. I just realized how that sounded.
When did you come up with that? You came up with that joke just now?
Yes.
Just now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Is that bad?
Quick on your feet there.
We can delete it.
No, I'm impressed. I'm impressed that you just came up with it and didn't save it in your back pocket. I thought for sure you saved it in your back pocket.
No. It was only it was as I was reading that I realized, oh no, that could be interpreted in a bad way. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're both full-grown adults too, which makes it more unlikely. Go ahead.
Well done. The second plot occurs in early 2020 when Morella Kessler, burdened with guilt about how she treated her ex-friend Vincent, whose husband's Ponzi scheme wrecked her life, seeks out Vincent's brother Paul to find out where Vincent is. After one of Paul's mediocre performances, she interacts with an odd investigator named Gaspery Roberts. The third plot takes place in 2203 and involves Moon resident Olive Llewellyn going on an Earth book tour to promote a reissuing of her most famous novel, Marienbad, about a pandemic. That book includes a disorienting scene that echoes what Edwin experienced. Life on the road has its ups and downs, particularly as stories start circulating about a pandemic spreading across Australia. A minor character in Marienbad is named Gaspery Roberts, and that also happens to be the name of a journalist interviewing Olive towards the end of the tour. The final plot takes place in 2401 on the moon, where one Gaspery Roberts is a night detective in a hotel. He learns that his sister Zoe works at the Time Institute on the moon and endeavors to keep the timeline unaltered. This line of work intrigues Gaspery and leads him to a new line of work that causes all of these different moments in time to intersect in profound and potentially disturbing ways. Anna, does that about sum it up?
I think the only thing I would add is that Olive's husband is an architect that builds the Time Institute. Although we don't know that for sure, I guess.
No, I think we do know it. I mean, it's pretty obvious from reading it. The other thing I suppose we could add is that Morella is confused by seeing Gaspery because when she was a kid, she also thought she saw Gaspery.
No, she did. She witnessed Gaspery being framed for a murder.
Right.
The one big thing missing here, Dan, then, is not just the twist, it's what Gaspery does, right? So he becomes a time investigator.
Right.
And his whole job is to figure out this one anomaly that they've discovered, this glitch.
This glitch that involves moments in time from 1912, approximately 1998, and like the late 22nd century, in which, these moments seem to converge. I actually kind of liked I thought it was elegant the way that Mandel described it as a corrupted file in some ways, in which all of these moments seem to intersect and overlap with each other. And the key thing that we find out, the big plot reveal, is that the connector is Gaspery Roberts himself. That when he gets hired by the Time Institute to go back and investigate things, he eventually realizes that he's the source of the corrupted file, as it were.
Because he chooses to save the life of Olive Llewellyn.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, if we get much further into this, we have to get into like whether the time loop works and whatnot, and like what the paradoxes would be. I think the only important question here is his saving of Olive's life.
Yes.
About whether or not that feels true or right. I don't even think it's like, would you do it yourself? Maybe like it's sort of like the trolley problem, right? Or killing baby Hitler.
Yeah.
It's like those questions always bother me because they just never, you never know what you'll do. And and the only time they come up is in something like a novel, right?
So,
but
this was one of the, I don't know if this was a problem I had with the novel exactly, but one of the puzzling things about this novel, I think, for me was that, so the Time Institute hires Gaspery Roberts, by the way, clearly an act of nepotism.
Yes. And
he is possibly the worst time investigator I have ever seen. He's really bad at his job. He spends 5 years trying to apparently study up so he can do this. His first interview is ham-handed, and in his second one, he just violates the rules. Now, you can argue that maybe he was doing it for decent reasons, but like, I'm just saying the Time Institute might need to work on, their hiring practices. That's the only thing I'm saying.
I completely agree.
Okay.
It is actually almost laughable that he spent 5 years preparing for what he did.
Right. Like, that was the part that didn't quite track. He's like, you spent 5 years.
Literally almost made me laugh because you got nothing out of it. Like, it's just also, it's one of those things where like, it's almost like in Loki when Loki's like, oh, I'm going to spend 100 years learning time or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it's just 100 years later and he's back. Although he does seem to have learned some stuff. I don't know if it really would take like 100 years, but Loki seemed to actually
did the work. Yes.
Yeah, Loki did the work.
Yeah.
And this one, it's a 5 years later. There's just a jump cut.
Yeah.
Like, we don't get any of like, what would you learn in the 5 years before you time travel? Like, because he seems to have learned nothing.
No, and apparently, like, one of the things you're supposed to learn is accents, and you're not really good at that. Like, he's explicitly bad at that. He's bad
and
at... He's bad at, like...
How bad is he, Dan? How bad is he? Let me tell you.
Yeah.
He's so bad, he doesn't recognize he's interviewing himself.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna give him a break there. So that's the first reveal. One of the first interview he does, which is horrible. Like, it's painfully obvious who he is. But the person that he's interviewing turns out is him 60 years later. Although remember that he was surgically altered, so it wouldn't have been obvious.
Right,
but yes, I grant you.
Also, I thought you were going to say you'll give him a pass because his future self is actually trying to fuck with him a little bit.
That was the only time I liked that character was when, like, the 60 years later. Like, the last couple pages of Gasperi I actually enjoyed a great deal, and it was the only time I really thought of him as a real character. The problem was before he's like a cipher. He
supposedly spends 5 years doing something, like some kind of psychological, preparation. And then he meets Olive Llewellyn for less than 5 minutes.
Yes.
Like, he's with her tops. Like, it's a book tour thing. Like, I've actually done these. You probably have too, where you just sit in a chair and like people come and talk to you.
I've not done these things, but I can believe you have done them. Yes.
Well, and then it's just like, okay, next person, okay, next person, okay, next person. And it's just a series of like journalists. I mean, and so he spends tops like 5 minutes with her and he decides to alter the course of history.
Right. And again, like, and basically the only connection he actually has with Olive Llewellyn is that Olive Llewellyn lived in the Moon 2 colony where he grew up, which is eventually called the Night City. And there's like, but that's a very tenuous connection.
And he's named after
one of the characters
in her book.
Right. Yeah. Marion Beth. But let me just wait. That was the part that, like, when I said the one thing I don't like in this novel is I didn't identify with Gasperi at all. And like why he does this, I'm kind of glad that he does it, but like it doesn't quite work for me, I guess.
So I kind of liked him because he is kind of posited as a fuck up.
Yes.
In
which case, why is the one thing I didn't hiring him? But yes.
Yeah, right. So there's two things. One is it's the spending 5 years supposedly learning when he didn't. I think the story would have been better and more believable if they'd just been like, all right. And also the nepotism kind of works.
Yeah, that does make some sense, I suppose, yeah.
And that actually makes sense in the context if you'd just been like, she wants someone that she trusts. If his sister, who works at the Time Institute, had just been like, I know you're not very qualified, but I don't trust anyone else. Like, that could have kind of worked. But it's the saving her that's kind of like, again, it would work if he hadn't gotten all that training almost. If he's just...
So really, if
flying by the seat of his pants, because he is believable as someone who acts spontaneously out of not very thinking far ahead, but kindness,
right?
Like who seems to just want to do the right thing in the moment, but doesn't think very much past that.
That is a good way of thinking about it, and I agree with you on that. But again, that raises the very awkward question of why is he working for the Time Institute and why is he sent back on this what seems to be a pretty sensitive and like critical mission? It's just.
And he's sent back again.
Yeah.
That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Is that he does this, which is supposedly like the one thing, right?
Right, but
like the one thing you're not supposed to do.
I think it's Zoe who sends him back before anyone can do anything about it. So that was a little more believable. So like that I didn't have a problem with. Although, again, why Zoe sends him back is, yeah. So anyway, We'll be right back.
And then we can keep going.
Yes.
We'll be right back.
Yes.
Dan and I will keep going, and I'll bring up flaws in the time travel logic, but you guys don't have to listen to this part. Y'all can just listen to the ad.
We'll be right back after these messages from the Time Institute. And we're back. Okay, Anna, you can just say.
We're back. That was like time travel.
Yes, exactly. It really was. All right, we need to get to the next section, which is part of Obama or a Bummer, which is why did Obama like this science fiction?
Or why did Obama tell people he liked it? That's actually the distinction I feel like I did not. I failed to make when we were talking about the script, Dan.
Okay.
Is there are two separate questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Is Obama's own attraction to this book? And then there's why did he tell people he liked it?
So I think first of all, I think he genuinely liked it. Like this is just me being, and the reason is that, and this is the part I legitimately love about this book, because I grant you that there is a flaw in it. It's not perfect, but like Station 11, Mandel tackles issues of existential dread with a mixture of kind of detachment, but also emotional resonance and weirdly
Obamian.
Yeah, she comes through on the other side with a dash of, dare I say, optimism. All right. And so I think, with apologies, Anna, I think he likes Mandel's audacity of hope, is what I'm saying.
All right. So yeah, this is the first question is like, do we think Obama genuinely liked it?
Yeah, and I do.
I think you're probably right, because another way of kind of saying, I think the same thing you're saying is it's the exact same thing you're saying. Maybe it's a slightly different spin. Which is, I do think Obama's kind of a detached dude, let's say, right?
Yeah.
Like he intellectualizes things and he's an observer of things. And this book has that quality to it. I think just having read Station 11 in this, one of the things I would say about Mandel's work is that she writes with a beautiful, observant eye, but there is almost a self-conscious kind of like distance that she has from the work that you're observing.
Yeah, that's a fair characterization, I think, of her.
Which makes one of the things that makes this book kind of weird is that it is so obviously autofiction, and yet it's the stuff about Olive that I feel like she doesn't. Well, of course, like she fails with the detachment there. Like the stuff about every other character, feels like you're seeing them through. You're seeing a very well directed, beautifully photographed, but realistic movie.
Right.
Like where you're seeing all the flaws of a character, but presented in a beautiful way. And then when she turns the camera on herself, it's like the lens goes gauzy.
It goes Sybil Shepherd and moonlighting. I don't know if that's so.
Yeah, this might be you get the Instagram filters like when she turns it around on herself.
This is where we might disagree. I'm not entirely. Maybe my reaction was somewhat different to those scenes. Those scenes to me were the ones that actually had the most like vibrancy to them, and and also like you're right. Like to some extent, the Olive Llewellyn character is painted favorably. But at the same time, her impatience and intemperance in terms of dealing with some of the, questions she gets, the tedium of the book tour. Why are you laughing?
Just like, if that's her being rough on herself, like I kind of admire it. Because like as someone who's genuinely rough on myself, like I wish that was the extent of my roughness on myself.
So you think she should have been tougher on herself, or she should have been like showing more,
Well, okay, let's get back to the Obama, what appeals to Obama, because I do think the detachment part appeals to Obama. I believe that, and I can see that. I think he also probably liked the pretty intellectual way it deals with the problems of time travel, right?
Yeah.
So there's that, and then there is like a humanity. I mean, he does save the guy. Gaspard saves.
Gaspard saves Olive's life. Yeah.
Gaspard.
But also, Gaspard has it in the end. Gaspard has a fulfilling life, which I actually was one of the satisfying aspects of this, and I like that.
Yeah, I remember worrying that he wouldn't have a good ending a little bit, and then I should have realized, like, oh no, this is an Emily
St.
John Mandel novel. He'll be fine.
He gets a good ending. Yeah.
Do you want to move on to like why do we think Obama told people he liked this? Like why put this on his list? Because I do like the image of Obama like having like all these trashy novels stacked up next to his bedside.
He puts aside the Dan Brown. He's like,
That he
all right,
that he
now what I gotta
doesn't
do.
put on his list at the
Yeah.
end,
Well,
like all these novels he really loved, but that don't make it on his year-end list. Like we have to assume that he read other books, like when he does his year-end list.
sure, there were
You
books he
know,
rejected,
yeah,
or he,
and
he
I just like
reread, Silence of the Lambs for like the 50th time or something. But yeah, he's got his favorites. And so I think the best way to put this is, who is the target demographic that Obama
who's he trying to appeal to?
Who's the target
Right.
demographic that when he lists this book? And I think we agreed, like as I would put it, angsty pandemic folks. Because I mean, one of the things that does come through in the novel is, I mean, this was a pandemic novel.
In 97 moms.
Yeah.
In 95 moms. Screwed up my own joke, but in 95 moms. Got it. Nailed it.
But yeah, no, I think it's safe to say, like, one of the things that comes through, and honestly, it's interesting that even it's only a year since this book came out, or maybe 18 months since this book came out. But reading this, it did evoke sort of the memory of like the early stages of the pandemic, where like, there's just legitimate horror and fear about what's going on, in a way that, while I suppose in some ways I don't think we're still in a pandemic phase. We're in a post-pandemic phase, but like, it's not like COVID has gone away. But like, one of the things that I found interesting in the book was Gaspery's horror at people doing things like hugging and shaking hands and so on. So I was like, how can you do this when there's a pandemic going on? And I remember that moment when the pandemic was going on. But I don't know about you. I've been out in the world enough to know that like we're still shaking hands and hugging people now.
Well, two things. One is Gaspery's remark about that comes when he's at the society party, and he says it during cold and flu season.
Right.
And I assume what his remark reflects is that in the future that he's in, which there are multiple pandemics, by the way, he mentions a few pandemics that have happened since COVID.
Yeah.
People are much more cautious in general. Like It sounds like it's gotten worse. That's a good. Well, people's awareness of viruses is such that like, oh, it's flu season, or it's whatever season. I guess we're going to mask up for a few months again, or we're going to stop shaking hands, or maybe also in this future people just don't shake hands as much, because shaking hands is kind of gross. So
okay then.
And I was just going to say, see, I think we've had this discussion, but I don't hug as much or shake hands as much as I used to.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is just that I realized I could say no. It took the pandemic for me to be like, you know what, I actually just don't like touching people I don't know. So like that much, or I'm sometimes not in the mood for it. So I do think there are some people, and I've talked to other people who are the same way, who like, what I liked about the pandemic was it gave me a reason. Like people would ask.
It gave you an out for something you didn't want to do all that much in the
no, and but people still ask, and I still say no. So there's that, and then as far as like what I think, why do I think Obama put it on his list? I mean, I guess mine is less about who is he trying to appeal to, and more like, I think this is just the exact kind of shit that people who don't like science fiction like want to believe is the kind of science fiction it's okay to like. It's like beautifully written, and it deals with like timeless questions about identity. And
the tone of your voice, it's beautifully written. Like, yeah, like it was almost like you were ready to spit after you said that. My God, it's beautifully written.
Well, I'm a genre fan in general, and I guess I have a chip on my shoulder for genre. Like, I mean, and we've read some of the stuff that I don't think, like William Gibson did not get the kind of attention that Emily St. John Mandel got for Neuromancer, and Neuromancer is beautifully written.
No, Neuromancer belongs in the canon. I mean, like, and I don't just mean the sci-fi canon; it belongs in the canon. So I agree. I'm with you on that. Yes.
And I think there's other books in the same, like, I'm a big Ross McDonald fan, a big John D. McDonald fan they write hard-boiled, detective fiction. Raymond Chandler fan. Some of the Raymond Chandler's writing is just gorgeous. And it doesn't ever get to the New York Times book review, or it didn't for many years, right? Whereas Emily St. John Mandel's career took her to the New York Times book review. And great. Good for her.
I am going to
Great.
point out, by the way,
Love it.
that
Love it for her.
I'm just going to say, Station 11 was her fourth novel. Her first three are actually apparently noir crime novels, just so you know.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Yes. Fantastic.
Mhm.
I love it. I love that for her. And I love it that she made it. Love it that she made it here.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And, you know, I'd be interested actually if Obama's gone back and read those. I mean, I'm curious. I'm curious to go because her writing is good. Her writing is beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also, and it also, it's just like, it's less, it's not her fault. Right.
Okay.
Like, I don't blame her for this at all. Like, it's more like, I feel like there's also really good stuff that doesn't get the same kind of highbrow.
So you're
attention.
not, it's not that you're angry at Mandel, you're angry at those who are neglected while Mandel is getting the attention.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And also who have this idea that genre, like stuff that's not reviewed in the New York Times Book Review, that's not, you know, on the front of the bookstore, doesn't read just as well as this. Right. I would really love it for Obama to like put some kind of like put like a tour book on his top 10, right? Like something that's been published by like a science fiction publisher.
Press. Right.
Like would be really cool. Although I think it was, I'm trying to remember who published Mystery for the Future. It might have been a science fiction press.
Oh, yes, I think it was. If it wasn't MIT.
But even that though got coded. It's just, I mean, you've had a book published. Like there's ways that books get positioned. Like it's not an accident.
Yeah.
You know, things get positioned to science fiction or not science fiction, and get positioned in this way that like who's going to read them. You know, like,
and I think it's clear that I don't think Mandel wants necessarily. Let me put it I don't think Mandel wants to be just a science fiction. She has greater aspirations, and you know.
I mean, maybe that actually just ticks me off just a little bit.
Yeah. But no, I think that's a good way of putting it. It's not that I don't think that she thinks science fiction is rubbish. She clearly doesn't. It's that she wants to be thought of as more than, you know, the writing is such that she wants to be thought of as not just a science fiction writer. And your point is there's nothing wrong with being a science fiction.
Just quote unquote,
exactly.
just a science fiction writer. Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know where we're going to talk about this, and if we don't spend very much time at it, but I think one of the things that disappointed me about this book, although it's kind of an Obama-y thing, is that, we mentioned it up top, is that I don't think it's very self-critical. You've said when we were talking about it before we started recording, and I think just at the beginning of the show, you know, there is a Emily St. John Mandel character. Right. And it is as though that character gets special treatment from the author of the book. And perhaps it's impossible to be very objective, obviously, but I don't know. I mean, I think about like we just read The Shining, and that character is talk about a warts and all, you know, depiction and autofiction. Like,
okay, here might be this. My answer to this might also explain, by the way, why Obama likes this book, which is when we talk
I think he has the same kind of gauzy vision of himself. But go ahead.
It's not gauzy. No. I don't think it's that. It's that. I mean, we talked about this when we talked about The Shining. King portrays an alcoholic in that novel so effectively. It's devastating. And I don't think King knew that he was talking about himself, you know, as an alcoholic. Not totally. In other words,
not as an alcoholic. You're right. Not as an alcoholic.
And that's my point. Like the alcohol, what makes that book extraordinary is, you know, a lot of things, but the alcoholism just feels incredibly, you know, it's not a cliche. It's just incredibly well rendered. And as you say, he didn't realize that in some ways, he didn't realize he was doing it. Or think about Nimona, where Andy Anderson doesn't realize that, you know, they're writing about, in some ways, a transgender character. They did it, and they did it incredibly effectively, but they weren't aware on some level of what they were actually doing.
Yeah, and that's what makes it a more nuanced view in a weird way.
Yes.
Like,
this is why I think Obama likes Mandel, and why you don't like this part. Mandel has full control over the Olive Llewellyn character. Mandel is entirely aware that this is autofiction, and I think what frustrates you is that not enough of what you think might be Mandel's true personality or warts seep through the book.
You're right.
Whereas I think for Obama, It's exactly
and
that
Obama's the same
control.
way.
Yeah, it's exactly that control that probably attracts, him to this book. I guess let me put it this way. I think I'm a little less harsh on Mandel in this way, mostly because, and I know maybe you don't think this is a big deal. I was actually kind of astonished reading this that she kind of acknowledges in the book that like the flu that she developed for Station 11 and the death scene, the sort of climax in Station 11 was kind of anticlimactic and that the flu was not terribly realistic. And the reason I'm surprised by this is that maybe this is not, something I think about. I just normally don't think that authors talk about their best-selling book in critical ways. Am I wrong about this or,
I don't think she's that critical.
Okay.
I mean, I think she has like questions as an audience member who says, like, I think that wasn't very climactic. And I believe one of the things that she says about it, I was going to look it up. She's like, well, was it very, she starts to get a little bit like, well, was that very climactic? She asks herself questions about it. Did I make a mistake there? She doesn't say I did.
No, but I think that's the closest.
But like that, well, what a fucking gentle thing to do. I mean, I guess I don't read tons, but I mean, Stephen King has been a lot rougher on himself, put it that way. Like he's one person that's been rougher on himself about his work. Like he's been like, yeah, I screwed that one up.
Right.
Like I mean,
okay.
I mean, it's also he's written like 1,000 different things. But even if you're like to say that that's self-criticism, it's not really. Like I remember getting frustrated with reading that part because she just kind of is just like, well, maybe that is, gosh, like you're not really interrogating yourself if you just kind of think that maybe that's a good question about your book. And I feel like I have. Like I feel like Jonathan Franzen's done the same kind of thing about being like, that's an interesting question. Like, and maybe they're just being polite. And in fact, actually, that's usually, I guess, kind of if I have a criticism when I see authors bring this up. And I've interviewed authors and I've had them say things like that. Like, I can't think off the top of my head, but I brought up criticisms of books to authors. And the general response seems to be like, that's interesting. I don't know. I've never thought about it that way. And I guess what I would expect for someone who had a real degree of like self-criticism is for to be like, fuck, that's right. You know what? I should have done that differently. Like inside the interior of Olive's head or inside Emily St. John Mandel's head, like is as far as she gets with her own criticisms of Station 11, like, that's kind of a good point.
Yeah.
Like when I think about my novel.
Okay. Yeah.
I think fuck, I really wish I'd handled that differently. I really wish I'd handled that differently. For my criticism of myself inside about my book is like pretty harsh. And maybe
this is going to sound like an odd parallel, but I think I believe it or not, what I'm thinking about now is Taylor Swift. The fact that she has like reissued a lot of her albums as sort of Taylor's version. Now she's doing that for corporate reasons, which I kind of admire because it gets her under the skin. But I kind of wonder, it would be interesting to have some novelists rewrite or release a different version of their novel. Thinking about this stuff.
They're trying to think about, people have done that, but they're not always better.
Yeah.
Well, The Stand, Stephen King did The Stand. And The Stand's actually a little bit better.
Okay.
His version of The Stand has some stuff that's it's longer. I mean, it includes stuff that got cut.
God.
Not everything gets cut.
In some ways, it's the version of a director's cut, although this is tricky because very often director's cuts are self-indulgent and like there's a reason why the edit should be made. But it would be interesting to think about this.
Well, actually, Dan, so this brings us to what I think is a really good way of framing how much we like this or not, and in keeping with how much control one has over one's own narrative. Dan, on a scale of 1 to 7 almonds,
yes.
How much did you like this book?
I would give this book 6 almonds. So we should explain that this is, you want to explain the 1 to 7 almonds?
Yes, I'll explain. So one of my very favorite Obama anecdotes of all time is in a profile done towards the end of his pregnancy that talked about his nightly routine being, he would read his briefing books and then he would have 7 almonds as a snack. And everyone jumped on that, of course, but because it's just in keeping with how we see Obama as being this ultra controlled person, right? 7 almonds, no more, no less. What I think is fascinating is that he and his team pushed back on that, which makes me believe it's true. Because in a weird meta twist, he doesn't want to seem like he's as controlling as he is.
Right.
But
yes.
I think I give it 3 almonds.
Okay.
But there is something else that we need to do when we talk about books on this show, Dan.
Yes.
But Dan, there's another question I have.
Oh.
And this is something that'd be important to Obama as well.
Okay, please ask away, Anna.
Is there IR in this book?
Anna, I haven't been successful at many things, but I've always been good at reading. And I can read the IR in this book. Yeah, there's some IR in this book. It's not a ton, but there is some. I honestly think one of the interesting things is Mandel being explicit about the use of narrative itself as a tool of colonialism, which is sort of the 1912 passages and a rather extraordinary sort of conversation at the beginning about the British Raj. I do think, I don't know, this works for me, but I was intrigued how in the 2203 sections, the United States was conceived of as no longer being the United States. There's references to, I think, the Atlantic Republic, the Texas Republic, the Dakotas, the Carolinas.
It's already the Texas Republic, Dan.
But I will say this, to the extent that there are politics in this, the best passage in it is when Gaspery's sister Zoe, who works at the Time Institute, basically explains the bureaucratic politics of the Time Institute. And she does a nice job here of sort of basically explaining bureaucratic politics 101, which is how does the Time Institute determine whether or not there's been a serious breach in terms of the timeline? It's whether or not the breach in the timeline affects the Time Institute. So that is how bureaucracies function.
I have a question about that, Dan.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
How would they know? Because if it affects the Time Institute no longer exists.
Well, I would assume that if it's fatally right,
or it's somehow different. But how would they know?
All I can tell, like, this is where. Let me put it this way: this is where I think it's a sci-fi answer. I don't know how they know, and I think I have no problem with Mandel sort of hand waving that because
I don't either. But it's a funny thing to say, but I wish there was some answer.
You would say,
we have an early warning system that if XYZ needs to happen in the year or whatever, or else the Time Institute doesn't exist. But then even then you have the question of like, well, how do you know that?
The way I would always want that, if I was going to do it, I would say that they actually had to create like a cold room or something where time, it doesn't matter what happens in the rest of the timeline. That cold room stays on the original timeline. So, that way you can go in.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
And I would accept that.
Okay. But it's not in the book.
But it's not in the book. Although now I like it. Now I kind of want to write a time travel story because you would have to hand wave the idea of like, how do you have that cold room?
Well,
you just be like, no, there is just this place. There's just a place where I would think of it static no matter what.
Exactly. And I would sort of think of it almost as like a docking station, like on a spaceship where like you have an outer room that you have to get into, then you seal that off and then you can enter the inner room.
Yeah.
But yes,
it's
like
air gapped.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I would do it.
Gapped.
It's time gapped. Exactly. But yes, it's a valid point. Yeah. Okay. Speaking of questions, Anna, I do have a question for you, actually.
Oh, go ahead.
Is there a critique of capitalism in this book?
Dan, not really. I mean, I think I think Mandel I know she has kind of liberal progressive leanings because I follow her on Blue Sky and because you can see in her work, but it's interesting. And she has some mentions about climate catastrophe. But one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting about the book is written from someone whose politics I kind of know, right? Is that we still exist with apparently no real, there's no reference to any catastrophe that happens
in terms of climate. Because there are references to pandemics.
Well, in terms of like any kind of cultural, like cataclysm.
Well, clearly there was, though. If the United States breaks up, like I will say, like that was kind of one of the things I wanted to know was like, did that happen peacefully or not? But
yeah, it seems like a lacuna. Like I guess when I say there's not really a critique of capitalism, there is a part I do. One of the sneaking suspicions that I have about my lifetime and your lifetime, Dan, is that things could get really, really bad in terms of our economy, right? Like, in terms to the point where, like, there is a cataclysm of left side. I don't necessarily think of violent revolt or anything, but like, we can't keep having a country where people go bankrupt because of medical debt, right? Like, we can't continue to exist in this way that there are people suffer because of late capitalism. In this, I mean, people suffer all over the world because of it, and they're, desperately poor people. But our growing inequality between the very top and the very bottom seems unsustainable to me in this country.
Rising inequality would be unsustainable. I'm going to point out that actually that inequality has at least been partially reversed over recent years.
How recent?
Basically, for the last 5, you've seen
well, it's been growing for decades.
Yes, no. But there's some economy.
I guess if it continues to, you're right. If it continues, then Emily St. John Mandel's vision of our future seems perfectly plausible to me. Right.
But by the way,
there's a part of me that just feels like something's got to happen. I hope it doesn't. Isn't that a weird thing? Like, she doesn't have her alternative history doesn't have a crisis in it. Therefore, there's not a critique of it doesn't have a crisis or solution. I guess that's what I really mean.
I guess
there's no crisis that happens and there's no solution that happens.
I don't think it's that there's no crisis. It's that she doesn't write about it. I mean, again, the elliptical references to the breakup of the United States suggest that does not happen without some sort of crisis. What she doesn't do is write about it. She sort of finesses it, which, by the way, is another reason why I suspect Obama likes this book, because
there's no policy.
It articulates, that there has been change, but it doesn't deal with the sort of, crisis of that. And I don't know, maybe this is the difference between you and me. I don't begrudge her for skipping that part, because that's not what she's interested in. Yeah.
That's what, when we talk about, is there a critique of capitalism or not a critique of capitalism? Like,
there's not, because she's not interested in doing that. Yeah.
She's not interested in it. And I guess what I'm saying is, where there would be a critique of capitalism to me is in either describing the crisis that happened that got them to where they are, or alternatively, the presidency of a cryogenically preserved Bernie Sanders, who are suddenly in the year 2097, they unthawed Bernie. They defrosted Bernie. He became president. We instituted, Medicare for all, and got a bunch of social programs instituted so that when her driver, for instance, something I thought about when she talks about having these, what basically was sounded like an Uber driver of some kind.
Right.
And part of me is like, oh, they still have the gig economy? That seems bad. I don't want Uber drivers to exist, 200 years from now. Or I want there to be a world in which people aren't slaving away, as though they were playing a video game in order to make money. The same, the way that Uber works, it has the same mechanics of a video game that you have to keep.
It's going. Gamified. Yeah.
It's gamified. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Moving along.
We get to our fundamental question, Anna, which is, we need to actually address this, which is Obama or Obama.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I think we might disagree on this.
I think we might disagree. I don't. All right, you go ahead and you go, and I got to think about how to where I am in this bipolar distinction. I think there is a middle ground.
So I mean, I like this book. So in this sense, I did not find it no bummer selection, and I think the thing I liked about it in the end was the way the book addresses what apparently was one of her primary concerns, which is this simulation hypothesis, the belief that, we're all living in a simulation, which, doesn't interest you. But I guess I liked the fact that what matters and what she, for her, what's important is, and what's important for Gasper in the end, is the point that it doesn't matter whether you're in a simulation or not. What matters is the life you live. And I think that is sufficiently optimistic. I know that. I don't know. I like that. Maybe it's, No,
I'm
banal.
laughing because I agree. Okay. I just know that never will satisfy anyone who actually believes we're living in a matrix. Or, I think you're never going to, someone tells you, I believe we're living in a simulation, or I worry we're living in a simulation. Can you give them this book? And they'll be like, you know what? You're right. Doesn't matter. And now I'm going to go live my life, because what really matters is I have a full life. I think the kind of people that get really caught up. Do you really believe she thinks of that as a real philosophical conundrum about living in a simulation? Because I guess maybe she says she is, but I don't feel it as a real philosophical conundrum.
I would agree with you that people who really are concerned about this, the book will not make them feel better. But then
Yeah.
again, I also think it's true that for the people who are concerned about this, no book will make them feel better. So
Yeah, I agree. It says, no, I
Yeah.
completely agree.
yeah. So but leave it this way: as a reader who had not thought that much about it, reading this book is like, wait a minute, are we in a simulation? What could be going on? And I think I really like the idea of the simulation treated as file corruption. I don't know. I just thought that was an elegant metaphor. And like there was a brief moment where I was like, wow, what if that really is true? And I like the answer that she gave. So in that sense, for someone who is not really wedded to the simulation hypothesis, I went on a nice intellectual journey reading the book, I guess would be the way to put it.
I have the same sort of feeling about are we living in a simulation about whether or not God exists, which is like, it doesn't really matter. Like, it matters for me in the way that I conduct my life,
Right.
and that for me, the belief that there is a God is a way that helps me make sense of my personal journey in the world. Right. But when militant atheists want to argue with me about it, I'm kind of like, why does it matter to you? What do you think?
Yeah. And by the way, that's how.
And also, what if I'm wrong? Who cares?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it doesn't affect my own. If it doesn't affect my moral universe, if it turns out there's no God.
And by the way, this is kind of how I feel about the people who would insist we're living in a simulation, which is like, if you want to believe that, that's okay. I'm not going to try to persuade you otherwise. I just,
See, I actually think that's sort of a more interesting question, is the people who believe we're living in a simulation, that can affect their moral, that can have an effect on someone's moral equations in the way that you make choices in the world that can be disastrous.
Believing that doesn't matter, we're all in a simulation. Right. Yeah, that's okay.
Right.
Okay,
in the same way that believing in a certain kind of God can be disastrous too. I mean, if you believe that God wants these specific things from you and you will suffer if you don't do them, that is what leads to, war, suffering, abuse, etc., right?
Yeah.
What are you smiling at, Dan?
I'm smiling on it because this has been a wide-ranging conversation about a lot of different intellectual issues. In other words, it's exactly what Obama wanted us to do.
It's true. Damn it, he got us. In that way, I guess it is an Obama book. Maybe even I have to say it's an Obama book and not an Obama book. Maybe that's the real criteria. Is it what kind of conversations does it lead to? But then again, what I thought you might say is that you and I just have those kinds of conversations no matter what.
Oh, that's true. That could be true.
I feel like I should also mention a really good documentary called The Glitch, which is made by the same guy that did another documentary I love called Room 237, which is about conspiracy theories about the Shining movie. Highly recommend, Dan.
Okay.
Very interesting. There is a whole, community of people that believe all these interesting things about the movie The Shining. The most famous of which is that it's really about Kubrick helping fake the moon landing. It's his like confession about having faked the moon landing.
Okay.
You didn't know that one?
I not really. No, I didn't.
Well, Danny wears that Apollo 11 sweater. So you go from there. Dan, just go from there.
Yeah.
Also, a less crazy theory, which is that one of the themes is about the colonization of the American West and the genocide of American Indians, which weirdly, like, there is stuff in the movie that you could kind of, if you squint your eyes, kind of see but it might also just be one of those things that Kubrick himself is interested in, so that kind of thing comes up.
Yeah, it just bubbles up on the surface,
iconography. Right. But anyway, the same director made a movie called The Glitch, which is he interviews people. He made it during the pandemic, so they're all remote interviews, but he kind of works that into the story. All the interviews are represented by avatars rather than actual people.
Oh, okay.
And they're all people who believe we're living in the simulation, like in the Matrix.
I will check that out.
And it affects their lives. Like they make choices in their lives because they believe we're living in a simulation. And that to me is much more interesting than the question of whether or not we're living in a simulation. How is these people and the choices they've made is much more interesting to me.
It actually, it reminds me, I think there have been a bunch of articles about this, about basically folks who are convinced the apocalypse is coming and as a result live their lives accordingly.
Well, it is eventually. The book makes that point.
Right. And but the
It's just a question of timeline.
But, the fact that, for example, they don't educate their kids because what's the point? The world is ending. They don't have any savings. Like the concrete things. And it's always that part is disturbing to read. Oh, wait. What's that? Oh, it's pieces of moon shield falling.
It's the sky, the dome is breaking. Okay. That was actually kind of a neat thing in the...
I also like Night City. I don't know why.
In the dome.
Yeah.
I imagine we're going to hear about the Night City again, Dan.
Well, not much, actually. It's the debris field.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Debris field. That's where we are. Yeah. Not in the Night City.
Nope.
Debris field.
Debris field is where we talk about things that we haven't talked about before. I actually only have one minor thing. Do you have anything, Anna?
Let's see. You go ahead with yours. Let me look at my notes.
I laughed out loud.
Oh, I do have a couple things.
Okay, I laughed out loud because at one point Zoe was described as working on, and this phrase just caused me to crack up, quantum blockchain technology, which was just like perfect bullshit. I did love that phrase, but yeah. What about you, Anna?
Two things. One is there's a point at which she's in the Republic of Texas.
Yeah.
Long may it rain. And she wants to go from one side of the highway to the other, and she describes an 8-lane expressway with no crosswalk and constant traffic. And I think I know about the expressway she's talking about that goes through Austin.
Okay.
I mean, there is Austin. One of the things that freaks me out about the traffic here is that there is a highway that goes through downtown, like a highway. You've been here, like
yeah. No, that's a problem. Yeah, I mean, there used to be a highway that ran right through Boston before the Big Dig, and also definitely a problem.
Yeah, and so it's and it has a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit, and it still freaks me out to be like going 75 miles an hour as like these buildings like whip by you. So, and that could be a lot of different places, but I can imagine her going to the Texas Book Festival, for instance, and like coming across that.
I do have one other thing I just realized, which is I love the description. And she apparently got this from another author that she was going on the book tour with. The fact that, like, it's only the bad chickens coming home to roost. The good chickens never do that. That was a cute little note.
Right.
Yeah.
Another thing that I have is she has a quote in here that is something like Olive returns to as kind of like a touchstone, which is, it's a good life if you don't weaken, which she refers to as coming from, I want to kind of say from a book of some kind, but I know it as a line in a country western song by Farron Young. It's a good life if you don't weaken, but who wants to be strong? Which I've always loved. It's a good life if you don't weaken, but who wants to be strong? It's a great song. And I also think that second line adds a lot to it, obviously. Yeah. I think it's a good life if you don't weaken is not a very aspiring thing to... I wouldn't need to point that on a pillow.
Oh, one last thing, which we didn't talk about. We didn't really talk about characters per se, but I really liked Gasper's sister, Zoe. And I think I said, I want to, if Mandel does write like anything more in this world, I want to see a spin-off, or I want to see a novel about Zoe. Because I don't know why, in some ways, like, that character is like, clearly, like, there's a lot going on underneath the surface, and I just wanted to know what was going on underneath the surface. So that was it. I've got it. It's a Great Life If You Don't Weaken is from John Buchan's 1919 novel, Mr.
I guess
Stanford.
that must predate the...
That would probably predate the country song.
Predate the country song, but I still think the country song is better.
Okay.
Right, Dan?
That's a nice symbol for how we feel about this book, I think.
Wait, okay. Yes, it is. All right. So if you're not a patron, you aren't because you heard ads, and maybe you don't want to hear ads. I don't want to hear ads. That's actually one of my primary reasons for becoming patron of things, Dan.
Well, there you go.
I get impatient with ads.
I agree.
And you can be a patron of our show at patreon.com/BaseTheNation. You also can review us. Dan, people could review us.
That costs you nothing. All you have to do is, just rate us and tell your friends and neighbors. You can also reach us via social media. We are both on Blue Sky. I am at Dan Dressner. She is at Anna Marie Cox.
Is that also sounds different than my actual name? It's Anna Marie Cox on Blue Sky,
no,
which is my
Anna
website.
Marie Cox. I apologize for the pronunciation, Anna. I apologize.
Yes, right. So my Blue Sky handle is at Anna Marie Cox. My website
is www.annamariecox.com. Yes, same spelling, different pronunciation.
Spelled the same.
I don't make the rules, Anna. That's just how it works. I have a Substack called Dressner's World. Anna is on Instagram as well as her own website. Do you have anything coming up, Anna?
Lots, but nothing I could really necessarily feel like sharing here.
You're not going on a book tour? Okay.
You, Dan.
I have some things that are coming out, but I will talk about them next week because I think I'll have a little more clarity on it at that time.
All right. Until then,
keep this channel open for more.